So we're having a great conversation about the books, and starting with Laughing Allegra, but then moving on to the two more recent books. And I'd love to know more about those, especially since each of them features interviews with a number of people affected by learning disabilities, touched by this issue. And some of them household names, celebrities even, and others not. So I'd love to hear more about the interviews themselves. What was that like, talking to some of these people?
In the interviews and on their own were really fun to do because we got to interview Richard Branson, who was hysterical. I mean, at one point he asked me if Allegra could go to Africa and work or something like that. I mean, it was just so off the wall.
He was ready to offer her a job.
He was ready to offer her a job, and I thought, she's never been farther than Boston. So I don't think she'd get to Africa, but he couldn't have been nicer and greater. And he said what a hard time he had, and he talked about the net and gross problem.
Yes.
And we interviewed Chuck Schwab, and we were both a little nervous about that one.
Yeah, that was a little nerve-wracking. And Cisco,
John Chambers.
John Chambers,
you know what's
CEO
really
of
interesting
Cisco
is these
Systems.
guys, David Neeleman was the founder of JetBlue.
Yes.
They're all very accomplished
Yes.
guys. And it happened to be all men in this particular instance. And yet, while they're talking about it, you could still see this sort of vulnerability that you know, they all had learning disabilities themselves. And so talking about, I do remember John Chambers we did on the phone, and he told us while we were talking to him that suddenly his palms were all sweaty because he was remembering what it was like. Gaston Caperton was the former governor of West Virginia, and he was telling us that, you know, he would get up to do the State of the State address, and a little voice in his head would go, "What are you doing? You can't read." You know, they still, in spite of all the accomplishments and everything, still have that.
But what we asked them was not to talk about their accomplishments, but to give advice to parents on creativity and give them advice and hope, and that's what they did in that book.